Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. The Bells of Notre Dame. The city of Paris, in the year of our Lord 1482, was a creature of stone and shadow, of river mist and whispered prayers. It breathed with the slow, heavy breath of the ages, a symphony of grinding mill wheels, clattering cart wheels, and the ever-present murmur of the Seine. But above it all, a heart of granite and grace beat against the sky. Notre Dame. The cathedral did not merely stand upon the Isle de la Cite, it was the island, it was the city itself. Its twin towers were sentinels of faith, its flying buttresses the skeletal wings of some petrified angel, and its forest of gargoyles a frozen congregation of nightmares and dreams, perpetually gazing down upon the teeming, fragile lives below. And within that stone heart, there lived a soul who was as much a part of its fabric as the mortar between its stones. His name, known only to God and the cold, unforgiving man who had placed him there, was Quasimodo. To the world, he was the bell ringer, the spectre of the towers, a myth woven from distorted glimpses and fearful superstitions. His body was a testament to cruelties he had never understood, his back bent and hunched, one eye sealed partially shut, his gait an awkward, lurching climb. But his soul, the soul that resided within that twisted cage of flesh and bone, was as vast and resonant as the cathedral he served. His world was a vertical one, of spiraling staircases worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, of dusty lofts where sunlight pierced through motes of ancient dust like divine spears, and most of all, of the bell chamber. Here, in the high, windy home of Emmanuel and Marie, the great bronze bells, Quasimodo was king. He knew their every tone, their every vibration. He would press his ear, his good ear, against their cool metal flanks and listen to the songs trapped within, songs of fire and ore, of prayers offered and lost. He would ring them with a strength that belied his frame, his body becoming an extension of the rope, his very heartbeat syncing with the thunderous peals that rolled out over Paris, marking the hours, the days, the passing of a life he could observe but never touch. The gargoyles were his only confidants, their stony snarls and silent screams a comfort, for they, like him, were misshapen guardians of the sacred. Below, in the sun-dappled squares and shadowy alleyways, life pulsed with a different music. Here, Esmeralda danced. She was a splash of vibrant color against the grime of the city, a gypsy girl with eyes the color of dark honey and hair that fell in a cascade of wild, ink-black curls. She was not merely a dancer, she was a weaver of fates, though she scarce understood the depth of her own gift. When she moved, with her tambourine shimmering and her feet beating a rhythm that seemed to echo the primal pulse of the world, something magical stirred. People who watched her, their hearts heavy with sorrow or light with joy, would see flashes of their own destinies in the whirl of her skirts, a memory of a lost love, the ghost of a future child, the shadow of a coming storm. Her dance was a prayer, a spell, a key that unlocked the secret chambers of the heart. Her little goat, Jolly, whose horns were tipped with what looked like flecks of gold, would dance beside her, its intelligent eyes holding a knowing glint, as if it, too, understood the threads of magic they were pulling from the air. Watching her, from the high, lancet windows of the cathedral's south transept, was the Archdeacon Claude Frollo. A man carved from austerity and ambition, his face was a mask of piety stretched tight over a furnace of restless intellect. He had taken the broken infant Quasimodo from the despised foundations of the Parvis and raised him within the church's cold embrace, not out of love, but out of a calculated sense of duty and a need for a tool utterly dependent on him. Frollo's faith was not a warm, comforting blanket, but a rigid, intricate architecture of control. He sought not the love of God, but his secrets. He spent his nights in a hidden scriptorium, surrounded by grimoires and astrological charts, seeking the levers of power that moved the unseen world. And he had long sensed that Notre Dame itself was not just a building, but a vessel, a battery of accumulated faith and magic, its greatest power slumbering within its bells. When he saw Esmeralda dance, saw the way the very air shimmered around her and the common folk were entranced, he did not see a girl. He saw a catalyst. A living, breathing key that could, perhaps, be turned to unlock the dormant energy of the cathedral and bend it to his will. His desire was a cold, sharp thing, a blend of lust for power and a darker, more confusing lust for the life and beauty she so carelessly embodied. And then there was the captain of the archers, Phoebus de Châteaupers. He was everything the sun touched with favor, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of wheat and a smile that could charm a bird from a tree. He wore his authority like a well-fitted cloak, believing in the order of the world, the chain of command, and the simple, honest pleasures of a good wine and a pretty face. He was betrothed to Fleur-de-Lis, a nobleman's daughter of delicate beauty and a heart as shallow as a saucer, a match of convenience and status. But when his patrol first passed through the Place de Grève and his eyes fell upon Esmeralda, dancing with a passion and freedom he had never known, the neat, orderly map of his life suddenly seemed faint and irrelevant. He felt a pull, a longing that was more than mere attraction. It was the echo of a song he had never heard but had always been waiting for, a melody that spoke of a world far removed from duty and courtly manners, a world of raw, untamed emotion. The stage was thus set, under the watchful eyes of stone saints and water-spitting demons. The hunchback in the tower, loving from a distance, his heart a bell waiting for a hand to strike it. The seer in the square, dancing with a destiny she could feel but not see. The priest in the shadows, coveting power and purity with equal fervor. The knight in the sun, torn between the light he knew and the mysterious, alluring twilight calling his name. And above them all, Notre Dame, its stones steeped in ancient magic, its bells silent but for the appointed hours, waiting for the moment when the fates of these four souls would collide and set its sacred, slumbering power free. The air in Paris grew thick with portent, a storm gathering not in the clouds, but in the spaces between heartbeats, waiting for the first note of the song that would change everything. The spring air, thick with the scent of blooming hawthorn and the distant, ever-present tang of the river, carried a different energy on the day of the Feast of Fools. It was a day of sanctioned chaos, when the world turned upside down and the grim hierarchy of the city was, for a few fleeting hours, mocked and appended. The great square before Notre Dame seethed with a joyous, unruly mob. Jugglers tossed flaming brands, vendors hawked spiced wine and stale pastries, and a pope of fools, chosen for his grotesque ugliness, was paraded on a litter to the raucous cheers of the crowd. High above, Quasimodo watched. This was the one day he was not a spectre, but a potential king. From his perch among the gargoyles, the world below was a swirling mosaic of color and noise, a tapestry of life he could observe but never join. He felt the familiar, hollow ache in his chest, a resonance as deep as the silence of the great bells before they were rung. The Archdeacon Frollo had, as always, forbidden him from descending, his voice a blade of ice. "The square is for the beasts, Quasimodo. Your place is here, in the house of God. Their mockery is a sin, and you are above it." But the words felt hollow. Was he above it, or was he simply too monstrous even for their mockery? Then, the crowd parted. A space cleared, and a hush fell, not of silence, but of anticipation. And she emerged. Esmeralda. She began to dance. It was not the practiced, courtly dance of the nobility, but something wild, ancient, and utterly free. Her bare feet beat a rhythm on the cobblestones that seemed to emanate from the very earth. The tambourine in her hand was not just an instrument, it was an extension of her soul, its jingles and shimmers weaving a lattice of sound in the air. As she spun, her scarlet skirts flaring like a poppy in a field of stone, something extraordinary began to happen. Quasimodo, from his great height, saw it first. A subtle, shimmering light began to emanate from the dancers, a soft, golden aura that clung to her like mist. It was her gift, her magic, made visible by the fervent energy of the crowd and the latent power of the place. But it did not stop with her. As the rhythm quickened, as her body became pure, untamed melody, a low, deep hum started to vibrate through the very stones of the cathedral. It was a sound felt more than heard, a subsonic tremor that ran up the towers and into Quasimodo's bones. Below, in the nave, Frollo felt it too. He stood rigid by the great western doors, his fingers clenched around the cold ivory of his crucifix. The theological texts in his library spoke of this, in coded language and obscure prophecies. The anima loci, the soul of the place. It was said that Notre Dame was a living entity, its heart the sacred altar, its voice the bells, and its blood the faith of centuries, crystallized in stone and stained glass. And he saw, with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity, that the gypsy girl was a conduit. Her dance was not just charming the people, it was awakening the cathedral. A faint, ethereal light began to pulse within the rose window, its jewel-toned glass glowing as if from a fire within. And then there was Phoebus. He had come to the festival out of duty, to ensure the revelry did not spill over into true riot, his helmet tucked under his arm, his blonde hair bright in the sun. He saw her, and the world narrowed to the space she occupied. He was a man of action, of tangible things, steel, strategy, the clear-cut lines of command. But this was something else. As he watched her dance, he did not see visions of destiny as the common folk did. Instead, he felt a profound and unsettling unlocking within his own chest. The carefully constructed walls of his duty, his betrothal to Fleur-de-Lis, his entire understanding of the world, trembled. He saw not a gypsy, but a woman of breathtaking authenticity, and in her presence, his own life felt like a pale imitation. He was drawn forward, as if by a physical force, his heart hammering a rhythm that matched the beat of her tambourine. Frollo's eyes, burning with a cold fire, flicked from the dancing girl to the captivated captain. He saw the raw, unguarded longing on Phoebus's face, and a new, more personal venom dripped into his heart. This was not part of his calculation. This night, this gilded fool, was touching something he, Frollo, had deemed his to study, to control. The girl's power was a key, and he would not have it tarnished by the base lust of a soldier. The dance reached its crescendo. Esmeralda arched back, her arms flung wide to the sky, a living offering to the sun. At that precise moment, a single, clear, unearthly note rang out. It was not the scheduled tolling of the hour. It was a solitary chime from the great bell, Emmanuel, a note so pure and powerful it seemed to still the very air. The crowd gasped, looking up. Quasimodo, who had not touched the rope, stared in wonder at the bell, which still quivered with the ghost of the sound. He had felt the impulse, a collective surge of emotion from below, channeled through the stone, through him, and into the bronze. The cathedral had spoken. The spell was broken. The shimmer around Esmeralda faded, the rose window's inner light dimmed. The crowd erupted in cheers, swarming her, pressing coins into Jolly's pouch. She laughed, breathless, her chest heaving, unaware of the cosmic disturbance she had caused. But 3 hearts had been irrevocably altered. Quasimodo looked down at his massive, distorted hands, the hands that could make the bells thunder, and for the first time, he felt not like their master, but their servant, a part of a greater, mysterious whole. She had awakened something in the cathedral, and in doing so, had awakened something in him, a protective, desperate love that was as vast and silent as the vaulted ceilings above. Phoebus stood rooted to the spot, the echo of the bell and the image of the dancer seared into his soul. The path of duty ahead seemed suddenly gray and desolate. The path toward her, though fraught and unknown, shone with a terrifying, beautiful light. And Frollo, retreating into the cool, dark silence of the cathedral, knew his path was set. The girl was the instrument. The night was a complication to be removed. And the cathedral's power would be his. He would possess the key, and he would turn it. The game had begun, and the stakes were the soul of Paris itself. The bells had given their first warning, a single, resonant note in the spring air, a note of destiny, of love, and of the coming storm. The days that followed the festival bled into a sultry Parisian summer, the air thick with the smell of hot stone and blooming linden trees. But within the heart of the city, a different kind of heat was building, a slow, smoldering fire of clandestine meetings and unspoken desires. The world had returned to its rightful side up, but the souls it had turned upside down remained forever altered. For Quasimodo, the cathedral was no longer a refuge but a prison of observation. His world, once defined by the vertical climb to the bells and the horizontal gaze from the gallery, now had a single, fixed point, wherever Esmeralda was. He became her silent, unseen guardian, a shadow cast by the sun she carried with her. He learned the rhythm of her life from his aerial vantage. He knew she slept in the relative safety of the Court of Miracles, the labyrinthine gypsy sanctuary, but her days were spent in the sunlit squares, dancing for her supper. He watched as men, emboldened by wine or her beauty, would sometimes approach with leers or grasping hands. And he learned to intervene. He never showed himself. He became a force of nature, a poltergeist of protection. A loose tile would slip from a rooftop, landing with a startling crack just before a persistent admirer. A heavy flower pot, dislodged from a high windowsill by a seemingly random gust of wind, would shatter at the feet of another. Once, When a particularly brutish thief tried to snatch the purse of coins from her belt, a swarm of pigeons, disturbed from their roost under the eaves of Notre Dame, descended in a frantic, fluttering cloud, pecking and clawing at the man's face until he fled in confusion. Quasimodo, from the bell tower, lowered the small, intricately carved whistle he used to call the birds he fed. A faint, sorrowful smile touched his lips. It was the only way he could touch her world, through these small, violent acts of grace. His love was a fortress built of stone and silence, and he its sole, devoted sentinel. Meanwhile, in the world of light and touch, a different story was unfolding. Phoebus, tormented by the memory of the dance, had forsaken the perfumed drawing rooms of the Hotel de Gondolier where his betrothed, fleur-de-lis, embroidered silks and spoke of trivialities. Using the pretext of his patrols, he sought out the places where the vibrant threads of the city's underbelly were woven. It took him a week to find her again, not dancing, but sitting on the steps by the Fontaine des Innocents, sharing a piece of bread with her goat. Her head was bowed, and she was humming a soft, mournful tune that seemed to make the very water in the fountain weep. He approached slowly, his boot heels loud on the cobbles. "Mademoiselle." She looked up, and the wariness in her honey-colored eyes struck him like a physical blow. She recognized him, the golden captain from the festival. "Monsieur le Capitaine. Have I broken some law? Is my sitting here a crime?" "No," he said, and his voice was softer than he intended. "No crime. I wished only to hear the end of that song. The one you were humming." It was a flimsy pretext, but her wariness softened into a look of mild curiosity. "It has no end. It is a gypsy song. It goes on as long as the heart feels the sorrow." And so it began. Their meetings were stolen, secret things, fraught with the thrill of transgression. They met at dusk in hidden courtyards where the jasmine bloomed. It sent a stark contrast to the general stench of the city. They met by the river as the moon painted a silver path on the black water. He was a man of few words, trained in the language of action, but with her, he found a new vocabulary. He spoke of the stifling weight of his duties, the hollow expectations of his class, the feeling of being a gilded statue in a world of living, breathing people. And she, in turn, opened like a night-blooming flower. She spoke of her people, their travels, their stories. She told him her gift was not one she controlled, but a current that flowed through her, a river of sight and sound that she could only channel. "When I dance," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the lapping of the Seine, "I do not see people's futures. I feel their weight. Their joys are like sunlight on my skin. Their sorrows are like stones in my pockets. It is a heavy thing, sometimes." He listened, truly listened, in a way no one ever had. He did not see a witch or a curiosity, he saw a woman, brave and burdened. He reached out, his calloused soldier's hand covering her slender, graceful one where it rested on the stone parapet. The contact was electric, a jolt that sealed the unspoken bond between them. He was falling, not into an infatuation, but into a profound, terrifying love that threatened to dismantle the very man he was. He did not know that their every meeting was observed. Frollo's network of informants, a web of pious beggars and ambitious clerics, was extensive. Reports came to him in the hushed silence of the confessional or in coded messages left among his books. The captain was seen near the Ponto Change. He spoke with the gypsy girl by the old lime tree. Each piece of information was a drop of acid in Frollo's soul. He stood for hours before the great stained-glass window of the West Rose, its complex geometry a map of divine order that he felt was being profaned. The girl's power was a pure, untamed force, a sacred fire to be contained and used for God's work, his work. And this Phoebus, this strutting peacock, was sullying it with his base, physical desire. It was a blasphemy. A theft. Frollo's own desire for Esmeralda, a twisted thing of the intellect and the flesh, curdled into a vicious jealousy. He wanted to possess not just her power, but her, to break that wild spirit and remake it in the cold image of his own devotion. One evening, as purple twilight settled over the city, he summoned Quasimodo. The bell ringer knelt in the dark of the archdeacon's study, the air smelling of old parchment and bitter herbs. The gypsy, Esmeralda, Frollo's voice was like the scraping of a tombstone. She is in grave danger. Her soul is threatened by a man, a captain of the guard who seeks to corrupt her, to lead her into sin. You must watch him. You must tell me where he goes, what he does. You are my eyes, Quasimodo. You are the protector of this house. And all who would seek its sanctity must be shielded from the wolves outside. The words were a poisoned dart. Quasimodo's heart, so full of his own silent, protective love, seized with a cold terror. A man. A soldier. The handsome captain from the festival. The one who walked in the sun, who could speak to her, touch her. The threat was real, but it was not the threat to her soul that Frollo described, it was a threat to Quasimodo's own fragile world. If she loved this man, then the last, faint, impossible star in his dark sky would be extinguished. Yet, the archdeacon's command was law. It was the voice that had shaped his entire existence. So, the hunchback became a spy, his agony a new, sharper bell tolling inside him. He followed Phoebus, his movements silent and fluid over the rooftops, a grotesque phantom tracing the path of the golden night. He watched them meet by the fountain. He saw the captain take her hand. He saw the way she smiled at him, a smile that had never been meant for the gargoyles in the sky. Each glimpse was a fresh laceration on his soul. He was betraying her by watching, and he was betraying himself by loving. He was caught between the two poles of his existence, his devotion to the master who had saved him, and his desperate, hopeless love for the girl who had awakened him. The romance between Esmeralda and Phoebus deepened, a fragile flower blooming in the shadow of the great cathedral. But around them, the shadows themselves were stirring. Frollo's plot was coiling tight, a serpent ready to strike. Quasimodo's heart was a battleground. And high above, the bells of Notre Dame hung silent and heavy, waiting for the moment when love and obsession would clash, and their sacred voice would be needed to decide the fate of them all. The days that followed the festival bled into a sultry Parisian summer, the air thick with the smell of hot stone and blooming linden trees. But within the heart of the city, a different kind of heat was building, a slow, smoldering fire of clandestine meetings and unspoken desires. The world had returned to its rightful side up, but the souls it had turned upside down remained forever altered. For Quasimodo, the cathedral was no longer a refuge but a prison of observation. His world, once defined by the vertical climb to the bells and the horizontal gaze from the gallery, now had a single, fixed point, wherever Esmeralda was. He became her silent, unseen guardian, a shadow cast by the sun she carried with her. He learned the rhythm of her life from his aerial vantage. He knew she slept in the relative safety of the Court of Miracles, the labyrinthine gypsy sanctuary, but her days were spent in the sunlit squares, dancing for her supper. He watched as men, emboldened by wine or her beauty, would sometimes approach with leers or grasping hands. And he learned to intervene. He never showed himself. He became a force of nature, a poltergeist of protection. A loose tile would slip from a rooftop, landing with a startling crack just before a persistent admirer. A heavy flower pot, dislodged from a high windowsill by a seemingly random gust of wind, would shatter at the feet of another. Once, when a particularly brutish thief tried to snatch the purse of coins from her belt, a swarm of pigeons, disturbed from their roost under the eaves of Notre Dame, descended in a frantic, fluttering cloud, pecking and clawing at the man's face until he fled in confusion. Quasimodo, from the bell tower, lowered the small, intricately carved whistle he used to call the birds he fed. A faint, sorrowful smile touched his lips. It was the only way he could touch her world, through these small, violent acts of grace. His love was a fortress built of stone and silence, and he its sole, devoted sentinel. Meanwhile, in the world of light and touch, a different story was unfolding. Phoebus, tormented by the memory of the dance, had forsaken the perfumed drawing rooms of the Hotel de Gondolier where his betrothed, fleur-de-lis, embroidered silks and spoke of trivialities. Using the pretext of his patrols, he sought out the places where the vibrant threads of the city's underbelly were woven. It took him a week to find her again, not dancing, but sitting on the steps by the Fontaine de Innocence, sharing a piece of bread with her goat. Her head was bowed, and she was humming a soft, mournful tune that seemed to make the very water in the fountain weep. He approached slowly, his boot heels loud on the cobbles. "Mademoiselle." She looked up, and the wariness in her honey-colored eyes struck him like a physical blow. She recognized him, the golden captain from the festival. "Monsieur le Capitaine. Have I broken some law? Is my sitting here a crime?" "No," he said, and his voice was softer than he intended. "No crime. I wished only to hear the end of that song. The one you were humming." It was a flimsy pretext, but her wariness softened into a look of mild curiosity. "It has no end. It is a gypsy song. It goes on as long as the heart feels the sorrow." And so it began. Their meetings were stolen, secret things, fraught with the thrill of transgression. They met at dusk in hidden courtyards where the jasmine bloomed. It sent a stark contrast to the general stench of the city. They met by the river as the moon painted a silver path on the black water. He was a man of few words, trained in the language of action, but with her, he found a new vocabulary. He spoke of the stifling weight of his duties, the hollow expectations of his class, the feeling of being a gilded statue in a world of living, breathing people. And she, in turn, opened like a night-blooming flower. She spoke of her people, their travels, their stories. She told him her gift was not one she controlled, but a current that flowed through her, a river of sight and sound that she could only channel. "When I dance," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the lapping of the Seine, "I do not see people's futures. I feel their weight. Their joys are like sunlight on my skin. Their sorrows are like stones in my pockets. It is a heavy thing, sometimes." He listened, truly listened, in a way no one ever had. He did not see a witch or a curiosity, he saw a woman, brave and burdened. He reached out, his calloused soldier's hand covering her slender, graceful one where it rested on the stone parapet. The contact was electric, a jolt that sealed the unspoken bond between them. He was falling, not into an infatuation, but into a profound, terrifying love that threatened to dismantle the very man he was. He did not know that their every meeting was observed. Frollo's network of informants, a web of pious beggars and ambitious clerics, was extensive. Reports came to him in the hushed silence of the confessional or in coded messages left among his books. The captain was seen near the Pont au Change. He spoke with the gypsy girl by the old lime tree. Each piece of information was a drop of acid in Frollo's soul. He stood for hours before the great stained-glass window of the West Rose, its complex geometry a map of divine order that he felt was being profaned. The girl's power was a pure, untamed force, a sacred fire to be contained and used for God's work, his work. And this Phoebus, this strutting peacock, was sullying it with his base, physical desire. It was a blasphemy. A theft. Frollo's own desire for Esmeralda, a twisted thing of the intellect and the flesh, curdled into a vicious jealousy. He wanted to possess not just her power, but her, to break that wild spirit and remake it in the cold image of his own devotion. One evening, as purple twilight settled over the city, he summoned Quasimodo. The bell ringer knelt in the dark of the archdeacon's study, the air smelling of old parchment and bitter herbs. The gypsy, Esmeralda, Frollo's voice was like the scraping of a tombstone. She is in grave danger. Her soul is threatened by a man, a captain of the guard who seeks to corrupt her, to lead her into sin. You must watch him. You must tell me where he goes, what he does. You are my eyes, Quasimodo. You are the protector of this house, and all who would seek its sanctity must be shielded from the wolves outside. The words were a poisoned dart. Quasimodo's heart, so full of his own silent, protective love, seized with a cold terror. A man. A soldier. The handsome captain from the festival. The one who walked in the sun, who could speak to her, touch her. The threat was real, but it was not the threat to her soul that Frollo described, it was a threat to Quasimodo's own fragile world. If she loved this man, then the last, faint, impossible star in his dark sky would be extinguished. Yet, the archdeacon's command was law. It was the voice that had shaped his entire existence. So, the hunchback became a spy, his agony a new, sharper bell tolling inside him. He followed Phoebus, his movements silent and fluid over the rooftops, a grotesque phantom tracing the path of the golden night. He watched them meet by the fountain. He saw the captain take her hand. He saw the way she smiled at him, a smile that had never been meant for the gargoyles in the sky. Each glimpse was a fresh laceration on his soul. He was betraying her by watching, and he was betraying himself by loving. He was caught between the two poles of his existence, his devotion to the master who had saved him, and his desperate, hopeless love for the girl who had awakened him. The romance between Esmeralda and Phoebus deepened, a fragile flower blooming in the shadow of the great cathedral. But around them, the shadows themselves were stirring. Frollo's plot was coiling tight, a serpent ready to strike. Quasimodo's heart was a battleground. And high above, the bells of Notre Dame hung silent and heavy, waiting for the moment when love and obsession would clash, and their sacred voice would be needed to decide the fate of them all. The stolen moments became their own universe, a secret world woven between the harsh realities of Paris. For Esmeralda and Phoebus, the city narrowed to the space between their clasped hands, the hushed words spoken in shadowed alcoves, the silent understanding that passed between their eyes. He was no longer just the captain of the archers, and she was no longer just the gypsy dancer. They were simply a man and a woman, discovering a country whose map was each other's heartbeat. He brought her small, foolish gifts, a ribbon the color of the sky just before dawn, a sweet pastry that melted on the tongue, a single, perfect white rose. Gifts that were precious not for their value, but for their contrast to the grim world they inhabited. She, in return, gave him stories. She danced for him alone in the moonlight of a deserted courtyard, the movement slower, more intimate, a story of longing and finding without a single word. Her magic, which usually pulled at the threads of others' destinies, now seemed to weave a cocoon around just the two of them, a shield of soft, golden light that kept the darkness of the city at bay. One evening, sheltered in the ruins of an old Roman bath, the sound of a gentle rain pattering on the stone above them, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of conquest, but of surrender. In that touch, all his doubts, his duty, his betrothal to Fleur-de-Lis, crumbled to dust. He was lost to her, and he welcomed the loss. "I cannot go back," he whispered against her lips, his voice raw. "I will not. Whatever comes, Esmeralda. We will face it together." She believed him. In the sanctuary of his arms, she felt a safety she had never known. She, who had always been the seer, the one who felt the weight of others, now felt seen. He looked at her and did not see a conduit for magic or a vessel for desire, but a whole person. It was a headier magic than any she possessed. But their sanctuary was an illusion, and its walls were thin. Quasimodo, the unwilling sentinel, witnessed it all. He saw the kiss in the rain-drenched ruins, a scene of such heartbreaking tenderness that it felt like a physical blow. He watched from a broken archway high above, the rain plastering his coarse hair to his misshapen scalp, his single good eye burning with unshed tears. The love he felt for her was a vast, silent cathedral, but theirs was a bustling, vibrant home, full of light and sound. He could not hate the captain, he saw the genuine devotion in Phoebus's eyes, a devotion he himself would have killed to express. His love curdled into a profound, aching sorrow, a bell of grief tolling silently in the hollow of his chest. He continued his reports to Frollo, his words becoming more terse, more choked. He spoke of meetings, of locations, but he found he could not bring himself to describe the intimacy, the love. To give those details to Frollo's cold, analytical mind would have been the ultimate betrayal. Frollo, however, needed no more details. The simple fact of their continued association was fuel for the inferno raging within him. He saw the change in Quasimodo's demeanor, the reluctance, and it confirmed his darkest suspicions. The girl was not just a key to power, she was a temptress, a siren who had enchanted not only the weak-willed captain but also his own simple, loyal tool. Her power was seductive, chaotic, and it was spreading like a plague. He spent his nights now not in prayer, but in frantic study, scouring the most forbidden texts in his collection. He found it, finally, in a crumbling folio bound in human skin, the prophecy of the bells. It spoke of a time when the anima loci of Notre Dame would be fully awakened, and the sound of its bells would not call the faithful to prayer, but would decide the fate of Paris itself. It would be a resonance that could either cleanse the city of sin or plunge it into an age of darkness, a sonic key that would unlock either salvation or damnation. And it required a catalyst, a pure heart, shattered by sacrifice, or a heart of pure darkness, triumphant in its sin. Frollo's mind, a labyrinth of zeal and ambition, saw his path with terrifying clarity. Esmeralda was the catalyst. Her pure heart was already being corrupted by Phoebus. He would be the one to shatter it. He would orchestrate a sacrifice, not hers, but the captain's. He would make her the instrument of her lover's downfall. In her despair, her heartbreak, the power would be unleashed, and he, Frollo, the master of the cathedral, would be there to channel it, to seize control of the prophecy and bend it to his will. The bells would toll for him, and Paris would be remade in his own severe, righteous image. The net began to close. Frollo, using his influence, arranged for Phoebus to be assigned to a dangerous, late-night patrol on the far side of the city, a pretext to separate him from Esmeralda. He then sent a message to the Court of Miracles, delivered by a ragged child who vanished into the crowd, claiming it was from Phoebus, asking Esmeralda to meet him at the secluded porch of the Church of Saint Julien le Pauvre at the midnight hour. He explained his plan to Quasimodo that night, his eyes gleaming with a fervor that was indistinguishable from madness. The captain seeks to defile her, to drag her into the shadows of that profane place, he lied, his voice a sibilant whisper in the dark of the bell chamber. You will be there, my faithful servant. You will observe. And when he attempts his wickedness, you will intervene. You will save her from him. Quasimodo listened, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He did not believe the archdeacon. The love he had witnessed was real. But the command was absolute. The conflict within him was a tempest threatening to tear him apart. His love for Esmeralda demanded he protect her from this trap. His twisted loyalty to Frollo, the only father he had ever known, demanded he obey. As the moon rose, a sliver of cold silver in a starless sky, the players moved to their positions. Phoebus, confused and irritated by his reassignment, patrolled the distant quays, his thoughts full of Esmeralda. Esmeralda, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and unease, slipped through the sleeping streets towards the assigned church, jolly trotting faithfully at her heels. And Quasimodo, a monstrous shadow against the moonlit towers of Notre Dame, began his descent. He moved like a great, wounded spider down the familiar stone, his heart a drum beating a frantic, terrible rhythm. He was going to the rendezvous point, not as Frollo's spy, not as a obedient son, but as Esmeralda's guardian. He did not know what he would do when he got there. He only knew that the sound of her laughter was a more sacred music than any bell, and he would let the world burn before he allowed the darkness to claim it. The romance had reached its zenith, a beautiful, fragile peak. Now, the fall was beginning. The night was a taut string, humming with a tension that had nothing to do with the wind. Quasimodo moved through the sleeping city, a creature of instinct and stone, his form blending with the deep shadows of overhanging eaves and buttresses. The instructions from Frollo were a brand seared into his mind, but the image of Esmeralda's face, the memory of her unguarded smile at the captain, was a stronger compass. He was not going to St. Julien-le-Pauvre to be Frollo's weapon. He was going to be her shield. He reached the small, secluded square before the church. It was a place of profound silence, the moonlight casting the worn stone of the porch into sharp relief, the rest swallowed by a pool of ink-black shadow. He saw her then, a slight figure wrapped in a shawl, her form tense with anticipation. Jolly stood beside her, perfectly still, its golden-tipped horns catching a sliver of light. Quasimodo melted into the deep recess of a doorway across the square, his breath held, his entire being focused on her. He did not have to wait long. The figure that emerged from the alley opposite was not the golden-haired captain. It was taller, gaunter, wrapped in a dark cloak that seemed to drink the moonlight. Even from a distance, Quasimodo recognized the rigid, austere posture. Frollo. The archdeacon had come himself. A cold dread, colder than the stone at his back, gripped Quasimodo's heart. This was not an observation. This was the trap itself. Esmeralda took a hesitant step back as the dark figure approached. Phoebus, her voice was a hopeful whisper that tore at Quasimodo's soul. The hood fell back, revealing Frollo's pale, ascetic face, his eyes burning with an intensity that was anything but holy. "No, child," he said, his voice low and resonant in the silence. "Not your captain. He is otherwise occupied, as he will be from now on. You." Esmeralda's hand went to her throat. "The archdeacon. What do you want with me?" "I want to save you," Frollo said, taking another step forward, his movements predatory. "I have seen the path you walk. It leads to damnation. This, infatuation with a man of the world, it sullies the gift God has placed within you. Your power is not for fleeting romance, girl. It is a sacred trust. A key to a divine mystery." "My gift is my own," she retorted, her fear giving way to a spark of defiance. "It is not for you to command. Everything in this city is under the shadow of Notre Dame," Frollo hissed, his composure cracking. "And I am its voice. Your dance, your magic, it awakens the anima loci. I have felt it. But you scatter its power to the rabble. You waste it on a soldier's lust. It must be focused. Harnessed." He reached out a hand, not to touch her, but to gesture at the air around her, as if he could seize the invisible energy she radiated. "Come with me. Submit to the will of God, as I interpret it. Your power, combined with my knowledge, we can unlock the prophecy of the bells. We can shape destiny itself. I will not be your instrument," Esmeralda said, her voice trembling but clear. She took another step back, directly into the moonlight, and in that moment, she seemed to glow with an inner fire. My heart is not yours to break. The word heart was the spark that ignited the tinder of Frollo's obsession. His face contorted, the mask of piety dissolving into raw, undisguised hunger. Your heart, he snarled. Your heart has been given to a fool who sees only flesh. I see your soul. I desire your power, your purity. Give yourself to me, or I will see that purity burn from this world. He lunged for her. It was the moment Quasimodo had been waiting for, dreading, and yet, in some deep, primal part of himself, expecting. The command to obey warred with the command to protect. The conflict lasted less than a heartbeat. With a roar that was less human and more the sound of the cathedral itself crying out, Quasimodo erupted from his hiding place. He crossed the square in 3 great, loping strides, placing his massive, deformed body between Frollo and the terrified girl. He did not strike the archdeacon. He simply stood there, a wall of flesh and bone, his chest heaving, his one good eye fixed on the man who had been his entire world. The shock on Frollo's face was absolute. It was the shattering of a fundamental law of the universe. Quasimodo, he whispered, the name a curse. Stand aside. You defy me. Me. Quasimodo said nothing. He merely shook his great head, a slow, ponderous movement of finality. The betrayal in Frollo's eyes curdled into a venomous fury. So. The beast has learned to love. How pathetic. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. You have chosen your side, monster. You will share her fate. He did not engage them physically. He was not a man of force, but of cunning. He took a step back, his eyes never leaving them, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Witchcraft, he said, his voice rising to a preacher's pitch, though the square was empty. I came to offer redemption, and I find her in the company of her demon. The hunchback of Notre Dame, her familiar. They consort here in the dark. He turned and vanished into the alley from whence he came, his final words hanging in the air like a death sentence. You are both condemned. The silence that descended was heavier than before. Esmeralda stared at Quasimodo's broad, hunched back, her mind reeling. She had seen him before, of course, the specter in the tower, the cause of frightened whispers. But now, up close, seeing the sheer, desperate courage in his stance, she felt no fear. Only a staggering, profound gratitude. You, she breathed. You saved me. Quasimodo dared not turn around. He could not bear to see the pity or horror in her eyes. He simply nodded, his head bowed. He will come back, she said, her practical nature reasserting itself through the shock. He will bring the watch. They will believe him. She reached out, her small, graceful hand hovering just inches from his misshapen shoulder, before she let it fall, unsure. Thank you. That single word, spoken without revulsion, was a balm on a wound he had carried his entire life. It was enough. It had to be enough. He finally turned his head, just enough to look at her from his one good eye. In that look, she saw everything, his loneliness, his devotion, his hopeless love. It was a look that spoke more eloquently than any poetry Phoebus could have ever recited. Then, with a gesture for her to follow, he led her not deeper into the city, but back towards the only sanctuary he had ever known, the looming, silent mass of Notre Dame. As they fled through the labyrinthine streets, the first shouts of the watch began to echo in the distance, and high above, the clouds began to blot out the moon. The storm was no longer gathering. It had broken. The great oak doors of Notre Dame groaned shut behind them, the sound a final, resonant note that severed them from the waking world and its pursuing terrors. Inside, the cathedral was a universe of its own, vast and silent, its air cool and thick with the scent of old incense and cold stone. The only light came from the perpetual red glow of the sanctuary lamp and the faint, colored moonlight filtering through the towering stained-glass windows, painting the flagstones with phantom hues of sapphire and ruby. Esmeralda stood trembling, her back pressed against the carved wood of the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The archdeacon's words, "Witchcraft, demon, condemned," echoed in the silence, more terrifying here, in the house of God, than they had been in the square. She looked at her Savior, who now knelt a few paces away, his great, misshapen form hunched and waiting, as if expecting a blow. The fear she had held at bay now surged forward. What had she done? She was trapped in a cathedral with the one creature in Paris more feared than she was. Quasimodo felt her fear as a physical chill. He kept his head bowed, his face hidden. He had brought her here because it was the only place he knew, the only place he had the power to defend. But now, seeing her cower from him, he felt the monstrousness of his own being more acutely than ever. He was a fool to think he could be her protector. He was the thing from which she needed protection. "You are safe here," he mumbled, the words thick and awkward in his mouth, and used to forming them for another. "The law of the sanctuary, they cannot take you from here." His voice, though rough, was not the growl she expected. It was deep, yes, and scarred by disuse, but there was a gentleness in its timbre that stilled her panic. She forced herself to take a step away from the door, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She saw the sheer scale of the nave, the immense pillars rising like a forest of stone trees towards the vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. It was overwhelming, humbling. And in the center of it all, this broken man, looking more like a part of the architecture than a living soul. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice echoing faintly in the vast space. "Why did you help me? You defy your master." Quasimodo flinched at the word "master." He finally lifted his head, and in the multicolored light falling from the great rose window, she saw his face fully for the first time. It was a landscape of sorrow, a testament to a lifetime of pain and solitude. But his eye, the one that could fully see, held no malice, no cunning. It held only a bottomless, aching sadness. I watch," he managed, his gaze dropping to her feet. "From the towers. I see you dance. You make the stones sing. You make the air kind." He struggled for the words, his large hands opening and closing helplessly. The archdeacon, his words are not kind. His heart is cold. I could not let the cold touch you. It was the most anyone had ever said to her about the truth of her gift. Not that it was devilry or a cheap trick, but that it made the air kind. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Esmeralda's eyes. In this gargoyle of a man, she had found the one person who saw the beauty in her magic, not the power or the threat. She took another step forward, then another, until she stood before him. She slowly knelt, bringing herself to his level, ignoring the instinct to recoil. She saw the intricate carvings on his rough tunic, the clever patches, the evidence of a mind that was not simple, but starved for expression. "You are not what they say you are," she whispered. A single, massive tear traced a path through the grime on Quasimodo's cheek. No one had ever said such a thing to him. No one had ever looked at him and seen anything but the monster. Her gaze was not one of pity, but of dawning understanding. It was a grace more profound than any he had ever found in prayer. He rose slowly, a gesture for her to follow. "Come. I will show you. The city, it cannot see you here." He led her on a silent tour of his kingdom. They did not climb to the bells, not yet, but he showed her the hidden corners of the cathedral that were his world. He showed her the echoing, empty choir, where the carved misericords told silent, grimacing stories. He showed her the shadowy ambulatory, where the tombs of forgotten bishops lay. He pointed up to the great windows, explaining how the morning sun would set the blue of the Virgin's robe on fire, and how the setting sun would make the reds and golds of the judgment window bleed across the floor. And as he spoke, haltingly at first, then with growing passion, his words lost their awkwardness. He spoke of the cathedral as a living, breathing entity. He called the bells its voice, the stained glass its dreams, the gargoyles its silent watchers. He was not a prisoner here, he was its caretaker, its devoted priest. Esmeralda listened, mesmerized. She was seeing Notre Dame not as a monument, but as a home, and she was seeing the soul of the man who loved it. For the first time, Quasimodo was not just seen, he was heard. And for the first time, Esmeralda, hunted and afraid, felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with being truly understood. High above, in his chambers, Claude Frollo stared out at the night, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the stone sill. He had seen them enter. He knew they were in his domain, defiling it with their profane alliance. The beast and the temptress, hiding behind the skirts of Holy Mother Church. The betrayal of Quasimodo was a deeper wound than the defiance of the girl. It was the rebellion of his own creation. He looked towards the bell tower, a dark silhouette against the bruised pre-dawn sky. The prophecy was in motion. The catalyst was here, within the walls. The sacrifice was yet to come. His plan had changed, but his goal had not. He would have the power of the bells. He would purge the cathedral of this infection. And he would see them both, the monster and the seer, broken before him. Down below, unaware of the venomous gaze from above, Esmeralda and Quasimodo found a moment of fragile, impossible peace in the heart of the storm. The hunter was at the gate, the world outside was calling for their blood, but within the stone embrace of Notre Dame, a different kind of magic was unfolding, the magic of a monstrous heart revealed as noble, and a seer who finally found a reflection of her own soul in the most unexpected of places. The sanctuary of the cathedral was a fragile, crystalline thing, and it shattered with the dawn. The first rays of sun had barely pierced the jewel-toned windows, painting the nave in pools of liquid sapphire and ruby, when the sound began, a low, gathering rumble from the parvis outside that quickly resolved into the angry roar of a mob. Frollo had not been idle. His sermon of the night, Seeds of Fear and Righteous Fury, had taken root and blossomed into a monstrous flower. The word witch was on every tongue, coupled with demon and hunchback. The sacred law of sanctuary meant nothing to a crowd whipped into a frenzy by a man they believed spoke for God. Quasimodo heard it first, his head snapping up from where he had been showing Esmeralda the intricate carvings on a baptismal font. His one good eye widened in alarm. He rushed to the great west door, peering through a crack. The square was a sea of torches, even in the morning light, and angry faces. At their forefront stood Frollo, not in his vestments, but in a severe black robe, his face a mask of grim purpose. Beside him, the captain of the provost's men stood, his hand on his sword, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "They have come," Quasimodo rasped, turning to Esmeralda. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. The fear was still there, but it was now edged with a defiant fire. "They cannot break the sanctuary," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. From outside, Frollo's voice rang out, amplified by the stone facade. "The devil mocks our laws. He hides his servants behind the skirts of the church. This is not a matter for canon law, but for the protection of our souls. We must purge this evil from our midst." The mob roared its approval. A heavy timber, a discarded beam from a nearby construction site, was seized by a dozen hands. They began to use it as a battering ram. Tum! The sound echoed through the cathedral like the strike of a funeral drum. Tum! Dust sifted down from the vaulted ceiling. Quasimodo's mind, usually a slow, deliberate thing, moved with the speed of instinct. This was his home. He was its defender. He looked at Esmeralda, her eyes wide, and a profound, terrifying clarity settled upon him. He would protect her, or he would die in the attempt. "The gallery," he grunted, grabbing her hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle despite the urgency. He pulled her away from the shuddering door and up a narrow, winding staircase hidden in the thickness of the wall. They emerged onto the high gallery that connected the twin towers, the wind whipping at their clothes. The view of the mob below was terrifyingly clear. The battering ram struck again. Tum! The great door, ancient and strong, began to splinter. Quasimodo's gaze swept his domain. His eyes fell upon the forest of gargoyles, the piles of stone and lead for repairs, the loose blocks. A plan, desperate and brilliant, formed in his mind. He moved with a strength and agility that defied his twisted form. He seized a massive block of stone, his muscles corded and straining, and with a guttural cry, he heaved it over the parapet. It fell, a silent, deadly promise, before crashing into the square just before the mob. The impact was thunderous, sending shards of cobblestone flying and men scattering with screams. The assault on the door halted momentarily, replaced by cries of shock and fear. Quasimodo did not pause. He became a force of nature, a one-man avalanche. He tore loose lead sheets and sent them spinning down like lethal, metallic leaves. He pried free smaller gargoyles, a snarling dog, a leering imp, and hurled them into the seething mass below. He was no longer a man, He was the wrath of the cathedral itself, its stones and nightmares given animate form. The mob recoiled. The myth of the bell ringer was now a terrifying reality. He was a demon, a giant, a vengeful god of the heights. Down below, Phoebus arrived at a gallop, his face a mask of horror. He had spent the night on his false patrol, only hearing the accusations at first light. He had fought his way through the crowd, his heart screaming Esmeralda's name. He saw the barrage from the gallery and his blood ran cold. He saw her, a small, dark figure clinging to the balustrade, and his world narrowed to the space between them. "Esmeralda," he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. He began to fight his way towards the cathedral doors, his sword drawn, knocking aside those who stood in his way. His goal was clear: get to her, get her out. Frollo saw him. He saw the captain's desperate, loving charge, and it was the final confirmation of all his hatred. This night was the corruption, the worldly desire that threatened to steal his prize. As Phoebus neared the shattered doors, Frollo gestured sharply to two of his most loyal men-at-arms. "The captain is bewitched. Restrain him. For his own good." Phoebus, his focus entirely on the doorway, did not see the men coming from the side. They seized him, pinning his arms. He fought like a lion, roaring his fury, but they dragged him back, away from the cathedral, away from her. Esmeralda saw it all from the gallery. She saw Phoebus taken, saw the love and despair on his face, and her heart shattered. Her cry of anguish was lost in the wind and the roar of the mob. Quasimodo, heaving another stone, followed her gaze. He saw the captain being dragged away, and a complex, bitter emotion twisted inside him, relief that the golden rival was gone, and sorrow for the pain it caused her. He had saved her from the mob, but he could not save her from this heartbreak. The assault had stalled. The mob, cowed by the aerial bombardment and the display of raw, terrifying power, was wavering. Frollo saw the momentum shifting. His face was a thundercloud. He had not anticipated this. He had not anticipated the depth of the beast's devotion, nor the power he wielded from his aerial throne. He looked up, his eyes locking with Quasimodo's across the vast gulf of air and stone. It was a look of pure, undiluted venom, a promise of utter annihilation. The battle was not over. It had merely entered a new, more terrible phase. The cathedral was under siege, not from without, but from the darkness that festered within its own heart. And high above it all, the great bells hung silent, waiting, their sacred metal poised to ring not for prayer, but for war. The siege did not end, it curdled into a stalemate. The mob, its fervor cooled by the rain of stone and lead, refused to disperse but lacked the courage to mount another direct assault. They became a noose of flesh and fury around the neck of Notre Dame, a constant, murmuring threat. Inside, the cathedral felt more like a tomb than a sanctuary. The splintered great door was barricaded from within with pews and fallen stone, a wound that let in the cold air and the hateful chants from the square. For Esmeralda, the world had shrunk to the cold, echoing vastness of the nave and the crushing weight of her despair. Phoebus was gone, taken, and the image of his face, contorted in love and fury as he was dragged away, was seared behind her eyes. She paced the shadowy aisles, a caged bird, her vibrant spirit dimmed. The magic that usually flowed so freely within her felt frozen, a locked-away thing. She would sometimes stop before a statue of the Virgin, but found no solace in the stone eyes, only a reflection of her own powerlessness. Quasimodo was her sole, silent companion. He brought her food, stale bread, hard cheese, and wine from the sacristy, placing it near her with a deference that was heartbreaking. He did not try to speak empty comforts. His presence was his language, a constant, hulking shadow of protection. He watched the mob from the high galleries, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He had won the battle, but he knew the war was far from over. Frollo was out there, and Frollo was a patient, cunning enemy. The archdeacon's patience was, indeed, a weapon. He understood the psychology of a siege. He knew that terror and starvation were more reliable tools than brute force. He had the provost's men enforce a cordon, allowing no one in or out, cutting the cathedral off from the world. But his true plan was more subtle, more venomous. He began to speak to the crowd, not with fire and brimstone, but with a voice of sorrowful reason. The demon and the witch think they are safe, he would proclaim, his voice carrying an unnerving calm. They hide in the house of God, believing his patience is infinite. But he is testing us. Testing our faith. We must show him we are worthy of his deliverance. We must pray. We must fill the air with such pure, devout prayer that it becomes a wall of light around the cathedral, a wall their darkness cannot withstand. And so, he orchestrated a new kind of assault. By day, the mob was sullen and quiet. But as dusk fell, Frollo would lead them in prayer. Hundreds of voices would rise in unison, chanting the litany of the saints, the Pater Noster, the Ave Maria. It was not the chaotic roar of a riot, but a disciplined, relentless wave of sound that beat against the stone walls of Notre Dame. To the outside world, it looked like a miraculous revival of faith. But inside, to Esmeralda, it was a psychic torture. The very prayers felt like curses, their collective focus a pressure that sought to crush her spirit, to deny her very right to exist. She would press her hands over her ears, but the sound was inescapable, seeping into the stone, vibrating in the air she breathed. Quasimodo watched her suffer, and his helplessness festered into a cold, focused rage. He knew this was Frollo's work. This was the true face of his master's darkness, not a dramatic clash of steel, but a slow, soul-murdering poison. On the third night, as the chants rose to a fever pitch, Frollo made his move. He slipped away from the praying throng and entered the cathedral through a forgotten crypt passage known only to him and a handful of the oldest clerics. He emerged into the shadowy ambulatory, a specter in his own church. He carried no weapon but a vial of holy water and a silver crucifix, tools of exorcism. He would confront the corruption at its source. He found Esmeralda near the high altar, kneeling not in prayer, but in exhaustion, her head bowed. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with a fresh terror. He was inside. The sanctuary had been violated. The prayers of the faithful are a powerful thing, are they not, child? Frollo said, his voice echoing softly in the hollow space. They are cleansing this place. Can you feel it? The darkness is receding. It is time for you to relinquish it. Relinquish the power you hold. Submit to its true master. I submit to no one, Esmeralda whispered, finding a last reservoir of strength. She rose to her feet. My gift is my own. It comes from life, from joy, from sorrow, not from your cold, hungry God. My God. Frollo's smile was a ghastly thing. He is the only God. And his voice is the bell. And I will be the hand that rings it. He advanced, holding the crucifix before him like a shield. I will scour the magic from you. I will have it, pure and untainted, and then I will awaken the anima loci and its power will be mine. It was then that Quasimodo descended. He did not roar. He did not run. He simply dropped from the darkness of the Triforium gallery, landing between Frollo and Esmeralda with an impact that shook the floor. In the dim light, he looked truly monstrous, a creature of shadow and wrath. You will not touch her, Quasimodo said, his voice a low, resonant growl that held a final, unshakable authority. Frollo stared, his faith in his own dominance shattering for the second time. You are nothing. I made you. I saved you from the dung heap. I gave you a purpose. You gave me a prison, Quasimodo replied, the truth he had always known finally given voice. She gave me a name. With a cry of incoherent rage, Frollo threw the vial of holy water. It shattered against Quasimodo's chest, stinging but causing no harm. It was a futile, desperate act. Quasimodo took a single, massive step forward and swatted the crucifix from Frollo's hand. It clattered across the stone floor, its silver gleam extinguished. Terrified, stripped of his spiritual authority, Frollo did the only thing he could. He turned and fled, not back towards the crypt, but up. Up the spiral staircase that led to the bell tower, to the source of the power he craved, hoping to lose his pursuer in the familiar labyrinth. Quasimodo gave chase, his movements sure and powerful on the stairs he had climbed 10,000 times. Esmeralda, her heart pounding, followed, driven by a dread she could not name. They emerged into the bell chamber, the wind howling through the open arches. The great bells, Emmanuel and Marie, hung like slumbering titans. Frollo stood panting, his back to the abyss, his eyes wild. The prophecy, he shrieked over the wind. A heart shattered by sacrifice. You have shattered mine, beast. You have broken your master. Now the power will be mine. He rushed not at Quasimodo, but at the great rope of the bell Emmanuel, intending to ring it, to channel the chaotic energy of the moment. But Quasimodo was faster. He intercepted Frollo, grabbing him by his robes. They struggled, a twisted parody of a dance, silhouetted against the night sky. Frollo, in his desperation, clawed at Quasimodo's face, his fingers finding the bell ringer's good eye. Quasimodo roared in pain and, with a final, mighty heave, threw the archdeacon away from him. Frollo stumbled back, his feet tangling in the bell rope. He let out a short, sharp cry as he lost his balance and pitched backwards through one of the great archways. His fall was silent, swallowed by the wind and the night, down into the dark embrace of the city he had sought to rule. At the exact moment of his fall, a profound silence fell, as if the city itself had taken a breath. And then, Without any human hand touching them, the bells began to toll. It was not the scheduled ringing of the hours. It was a wild, joyous, sorrowful, triumphant peal. Emmanuel and Marie sang as they had never sung before, their bronze voices radiating a visible, golden wave of light that pulsed out from the tower and swept over Paris. It was the anima loci, finally, fully awake. The prophecy fulfilled not by a heart of darkness, but by a heart of pure, selfless love shattered by sacrifice. The wave of light washed over the square. The mob, their fervor broken, fell silent, their anger replaced by awe and a strange, cleansing peace. It washed over the city, touching every sleeping soul. In a cell near the Châtelet, Phoebus, who had been planning a desperate escape, felt a sudden, inexplicable calm and a surge of hope, as if the very stones were telling him to wait. In the bell tower, Esmeralda watched, tears streaming down her face, as the golden light pulsed from the bells. And she watched Quasimodo. He stood before the great bell Emmanuel, his hands pressed against its vibrating metal, his head bowed. He was not ringing it, he was communing with it. The light seemed to flow into him, through him. The tolling was a requiem for Frollo, a celebration for Paris, and a farewell. She saw the toll it was taking on him. The immense, supernatural energy was burning through his mortal frame. His form began to glow, to become translucent, the stone dust and grief of a lifetime burning away in the sacred fire. "Quasimodo," she cried, rushing forward. He turned his head, and for a moment, his face was not that of a monster, but of a king, serene and filled with a love as vast as the sky. He smiled at her, a true, unburdened smile. Then, as the bells reached their final, ecstatic note, his body dissolved into a shower of golden light, which was absorbed into the great bronze of the bell. The ringing stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than any that had come before, a silence full of presence, not absence. The siege was over. Frollo was gone. With the dawn, the mob dispersed, confused and chastened. The provost's men, finding no leader and no cause, withdrew. Phoebus was released, the charges against him evaporating in the new, strange atmosphere of the city. He found Esmeralda in the square, staring up at the silent tower. They embraced, their love tempered by sorrow and miracle, a bond that had been tested by fire and sealed by a sacrifice neither would ever forget. They remained in Paris, their lives intertwined with the great cathedral. Phoebus, disillusioned with the politics of the court, became a true protector of the people. Esmeralda's dances were now attended with a reverence that bordered on the sacred, for she was the living witness to the soul of Notre Dame. And the cathedral itself, it was different. It felt more alive. The stained glass seemed to hold its light longer. The gargoyles seemed less like monsters and more like vigilant guardians. And the bells, when the bell ringers pulled the ropes, held a new, deeper, more melodic tone, a sound that held an echo of ancient sorrow and eternal love. For sometimes, on still evenings when the wind was just right, or on the anniversary of that fateful night, the bells would toll a single, soft, clear note all on their own. And those who looked up at the great west rose window at that precise moment would swear they could see a figure woven into the new light that poured through the glass, a figure, strong and watchful, with a gentle, homely face, forever gazing down upon the city, the eternal guardian in the stone and the song. We hope you were swept away by the bells, the magic, and the timeless sacrifice within the halls of Notre Dame. If this romantic fantasy retelling found a place in your heart, please let us know. Your subscription fuels the fires of our forge, allowing us to craft more tales for you. A like, a comment sharing your thoughts. Was it Quasimodo's devotion, Esmeralda's gift, or Frollo's dark ambition that captivated you the most? Each one is a cherished note in our song. Thank you for listening. Until the next story calls.